How much should you have in traditional and Roth and brokerage? Most people spend decades saving for retirement, but most people don't spend as much time thinking about where they're saving. It's very likely that you put money into a 401k because that's what you had at work. And, maybe you also contributed to a Roth IRA when you had a chance to. Maybe you even built up a brokerage account along the way. And then, one day, usually I find this to be the case within a few years of retirement, people start to ask, do I have the right balance now between traditional, Roth, and brokerage? And it's a great question, but the honest truth there is that there is no perfect mix that applies to everybody. And I'll tell you, if you're feeling a little uncertain or even thinking, I probably didn't plan this part as intentionally as I should have, then you're not alone. I mean, most people never choose to be pre-tax heavy in retirement, but that is the case for most people. It's just kind of how the system is set up. I mean, most workplaces only offered a traditional 401k. So really, I mean, that's where the money went. Now, today, instead of giving you a one-size-fits-all formula, what I want to do is I want to walk you through how I actually think about this when I'm helping someone plan their retirement. And this is no matter whether you're single, widowed, divorced, or part of a couple. Now, as a quick refresher to make sure we're all on the same page. So traditional accounts are tax deferred. So you got the tax deduction on the front end, grew tax deferred, and then on the back end, every dollar that you withdraw is going to be subject to ordinary income tax. Now, Roth accounts pay the tax up front, grew tax deferred, and then when you withdraw it later on, years in the future in retirement, it's tax-free, all of it, when you pull it out. The brokerage accounts, these are flexible, right? These are a lot different. Some of it's cost basis, the amount that we put in. Some of it is long-term and short-term capital gains. We have dividends and interest. And so all this is taxed differently. But, here's something that people often don't think about, I find, is that these accounts that you have don't operate independently. I mean, they work together. And the balance between them determines how much control that you have over your taxes and your income, your withdrawals, your Medicare premiums, your overall long-term planning options. And it's not just this year that I'm talking about. Again, it's for the next 10 years, 20 years, or 30 years of retirement. Here's a bad analogy for you. Think of it like having a toolbox. If every tool that you have is the same, you might still be able to get the job done, but it's harder to adapt when things change. And you can't be as flexible as you might want to be. Here's the thing. Most people assume that if I have saved enough, I should be fine. And, we see this everywhere. There's some magic number in retirement. There used to be some commercials. Maybe there still are about that. Like, here's the number that you have to have saved before you can retire comfortably. And, in a broader sense, I mean, yeah, it's probably true if you saved enough. But the reality is that if you take two people that have the same exact savings, they could pay very different lifetime taxes simply based upon how their savings are allocated. And it's not because they're in different tax brackets today necessarily, but it's because one person has some more flexibility over the course of time. And that brings me to two real examples I want to share with you here today. So the first is, I once worked with this couple. I'm going to call them Don and Linda. And they were great savers. I mean, they did everything right. They retired with just over $1 million, and almost all of it was in traditional retirement accounts. And early in retirement, they needed to withdraw about $80,000 a year to live on. And since their Social Security hadn't started yet, I mean, most of that did come from the IRA. They had a little bit of other savings, but again, most was coming from the IRA. And a few years later, when Social Security kicked in, things shifted. I mean, they reduced their IRA withdrawals, from about $80,000 down to about $20,000 a year. And Social Security was then able to cover the rest. And, here's the key point is that, for them, their taxes didn't suddenly jump. They weren't pushed into a higher bracket. They weren't anywhere near IRMA or anything like that. I mean, everything looked fine. But their real issue is that almost all of their money lived in that one bucket, that pre-tax bucket. And so every dollar that they needed created taxable income. They didn't have as much flexibility as a result of to now pull from maybe a low tax or a tax-free source, and they couldn't do some more strategic planning in their 60s. Or I shouldn't say they couldn't do any, but they were definitely limited in what they could do. And also, once RMDs began, they were forced then to take more than they wanted in their case. Now, it wasn't anything catastrophic. It wasn't like the RMDs were like super sky high, way more than that they needed. But in their case, they just didn't have the ability to adapt. And I remember Don eventually said, we just didn't realize how much we limited our options by saving everything in one place, which is kind of what we did. We saved at work. And that's what most people do. And, the thing is that that's the real risk. It's not high taxes today, but it's less control tomorrow. And certainly if tax rates and things like that did increase in the future, then having other monies in brokerage or in Roth accounts and things like that could provide even more flexibility and perhaps help to reduce taxes even more. Now, let me give you a different example. And this is a single guy. I'll call him Taylor. And Taylor didn't have dramatically more money, but his savings were more balanced. So he had some that was in traditional accounts, some in Roth, and then some in a brokerage account. I mean, nothing extreme, just enough to be, more spread out to have more options. And, for Taylor, we were able to structure his income where in some years he would pull more money from the brokerage account and maybe less money from the IRA and vice versa. And the Roth account largely stayed untouched to be able to grow for later on in the later years of retirement. Now, before Social Security for him, this mix really allowed him to make some small strategic moves. So as an example, we were able to shift some of the money over that was in the pre-tax accounts over to a Roth by doing a Roth conversion, and just some real small Roth conversions that we did. And we were able to do that without really bumping into higher taxes. I mean, certainly he had to pay taxes on the amount of the conversion, but it's not like he got bumped up into a high tax bracket. But he had the cash on the sidelines because he had the money in the brokerage account to be able to pay the tax on that Roth conversion. So that's just an example of, by having that money in those different accounts where you had that flexibility to be able to do that. Otherwise, if he was to do that Roth conversion and he didn't have any other money other than pre-tax, well, then he's got to withhold from that IRA. And then, the remaining money after what's being withheld only goes over to the Roth. So it's always better if you can to be able to pay the tax on a Roth conversion from the money that's in outside of the IRA. And that's especially important if you're under 59 and a half. Now, I met him after that, so that really didn't apply. But in his case, again, also before Social Security began, we were able to reduce his IRA withdrawal. So we were able to be strategic about how much he was going to withdraw, not just through his 60s, but then thinking ahead as to what his future RMDs were going to be. And so as a result, kind of make it so we didn't have some huge spikes in how much he would have to withdraw from his IRA accounts in future years. The key point here is that if you have a mix of assets in different types of accounts, it can help to give you more options. People sometimes ask me, what percentage should I have in each account? And, the truth is again, there is no universal percentage. Two people with identical balances can have completely different outcomes, all depending on things like when they claim Social Security and what their income needs are and whether they have a pension and how they handle health insurance before 65, whether they're single or filing jointly or what their longevity looks like and even where they live. So instead of chasing a perfect ratio, here's what actually matters. First thing is, do you have at least one flexibility account? And I say flexibility kind of quote unquote here, because it doesn't matter whether it's a Roth or a brokerage, but if you have something outside of your pre-tax accounts, this can help with a lot of that flexibility. So just as an example, I mean, there's a lot of examples where this can help, but one of them being, it can help to manage how much of your Social Security is taxed. It can help to keep your taxable income lower, perhaps, if you need to manage what your income is. If you're on an ACA plan, let's say, and you want to get the subsidies, so you're doing that. It could also help by, having the money if it's in a brokerage account, let's say, pay the tax on a Roth conversion as an example. Also, if you're single or if you become single later on, it can help to be a way to manage your income in lower tax brackets. I mean, really, the flexibility here is the key. It's not perfection. And the second thing is, could you be forced to withdraw more later on than you actually want to? Required minimum distributions can gradually reduce your control. I mean, it's common to see someone withdraw moderately in their 60s and just kind of watch the accounts grow, and then later on face required spending withdrawals that are higher than what their spending needs are. It may not necessarily be a crisis at all, but it can certainly limit your choices. And the third thing is, does your mix let you adapt when life changes? Over the course of a long retirement, flexibility matters during moments like when Social Security begins, when a spouse passes away, during a market downturn, when unexpected expenses come up, when health or lifestyle changes, when tax laws change, and when you're deciding whether to do Roth conversions. Your account mix is what gives you leverage in these moments. I often talk with people who say, I don't have much in Roth or a brokerage. I think I might have missed the boat here. And the reality is maybe not. You might still be in a very good position. Maybe it made a ton of sense for you to contribute to that pre-tax account. Maybe you're in a very high tax bracket, and based on your situation, it makes sense. But, kind of going forward, just to evaluate your situation, if you're still a few years or several years away from retirement and have the opportunity to maybe start contributing to a Roth account based on your income, right? There's some rules there and things like that. Maybe it makes sense, again, depending on your tax bracket today and what it will likely be in the future. Maybe it does make sense to open a brokerage account, things like that. It makes sense to start paying attention to where you are saving, what tax bracket you are in today, and where you will likely be throughout retirement. It's rarely too late to increase your flexibility. And so, if you're thinking for yourself at this point in my life, based on my current situation and where I have money saved and how much and all of these things, what should I be doing going forward? How much should I be saving in these different accounts? That's one of the things that I help people with as a part of planning for retirement. So if you'd like to learn more about what it's like to work with me, click on the link down below and schedule a call, and I'll look forward to talking to you soon. You take care. I'll see you in the next video.